It began in Africa.
Yeah.
We are controlling transmission.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you say?
Yeah. 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 Okay.
Hello and welcome to Afrospace with me, Adetunji Omotola, and my co-host, Nyasha Grace. Today we are doing a special feature of Afrospace, which today's a date in history that coincides with the 31st anniversary of the release of Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela from prison. As many of us already know, Nelson Mandela was the first Black president of South Africa, and he was sworn in 1994 on the 27th of April. And today, joining us at Afrospace is Nelson Mandela's first granddaughter, from his first son, Thembekile, and from his first wife, Evelyn Mandela Nimase. Ndileka, welcome to Afrospace.
No, thank you, Tunji, and greetings to whoever is watching at Afrospace. I'm really honored to be with you today, and also greetings to Nasha as well.
Okay, so we want to
Thank
find
you.
out from you, Ndileka. We're having to get your experiences of living a life as a Mandela, where on one end your grandfather is an icon and a world legend, and on another part he's a grandfather, and you as a person now also figuring out your own identity as a person. So perhaps take us back. Let's go back some years ago. The year before that you were born, your grandfather was sentenced to prison, and it was a life sentencing. And how did that impact you as a young child? How did you grow up with the burden of knowing that you had your grandfather in prison, and the chances are perhaps you were never going to see him as a free man?
Well, the first is that, I grew up in a very sheltered environment by virtue that Evelyn was a Jehovah's Witness. And if you know anything about the tenets of Jehovah's Witness, they are apolitical. So for the greater part of my childhood, I didn't know much about Granddad until he started writing to me at the age of 10. And then I started knowing about him. And then again, because my mother stayed in Cape Town, and whenever we would visit Cape Town, we'd go up Lion's Head or Table Mountain, and it would be whispered in hushed tones. I mean, Robben Island would be pointed to me that that's where your grandfather is. But having growing up in the Eastern Cape, my grandfather was deemed a terrorist. So it was no big deal for us because at the time he was not a president. So I grew up under that sheltered environment, but I certainly knew who he was, and I knew what he was imprisoned for. And then I started visiting him at the age of 16, and then I got to know much more about him. And also by that time, I had already been baptized into politics because when I turned 15, I attended boarding school. Now, boarding school was the first time that I was out of the household of my grandmother and thrown into the deep end of interacting with other children that were very political. So I partook in my first strike that year at Nyanga High School to the extent that they issued me a no return because I partook in the strike. So that was my first conscientization into politics when I went to boarding school.
Okay. Ndileka, your grandpa was in various prisons, Paulsmore, Robben Island, you just mentioned, and because he suffered, he had contracted contracted tuberculosis, TB, at the Robben Island. He was then transferred to Victor Vesta prison. Now, can you give us a sense? You mentioned earlier that you started to visit him at 16. Well, can you give us a sense how all that happened? How did that whole experience of visiting him? How was it for you as a youngster going to visit your grandfather in prison?
Well, it's quite strange because I'm the eldest of the grandchildren. I think myself and Nandi, maybe Mandla, I'm not so sure, but I think myself and Nandi are the only ones that had the privilege. Well, I can't call it a privilege. Well, it was a privilege to see him to go to Robben Island. So I saw him Robben Island, Portsmouth, and Victor Vesta. But I mean, Robben Island was it was quite strange because when you are a child, a progeny of a political prisoner, nobody explains to you what's going to happen. When I went for my first visit, my aunt did not explain to me that when I go there, I would not be able to say anything that I wanted. I would be in the company of a warder all the time. I would not be able to touch Granddad. I would see him through a glass panel. I would kiss a glass panel. I had to be comfortable within strange. It was very constrained. And it was also my first ferry ride. I had never been on a boat before. So it's quite strange, but the progeny of political prisoners learn to make the abnormal the new normal. Because by the time he was then transferred to Portsmouth, I knew the drill down pat. You wait, you go there, you report, they sign you in, you then go to the waiting room. Of course, because you're visiting a political prisoner, you go to a sectioned part in Portsmouth where you still, see him through a glass panel. When in 1984, when I then went to Portsmouth, because I knew the drill, and this time around, I was then ushered into sort of an office, and it was a bit strange that I was sent to this is an office, and they did not tell me, even Granddad did not prepare me that this was the first contact visit. And at the time I was 19, and I touched Granddad for the first time at the age of 19. I can't even begin to explain how it was, but it was so surreal that finally, I'm able to touch and feel this person. That was the brutality of apartheid, because if and also the fact that at age 16, when I went to Robben Island, little did I know then that it was the last time Granddad had seen my father alive at the age of 16. And I think all these emotions were running through his head. But he never made me see that, never made me see that pain. He made me comfortable. It would be years later when I would read the prison letters that he wrote at around the time that my father died, that he had last seen my father at age 16. So here I was, age 16, at the last age that he had seen my father. And yet he did not make me feel, the emotions that were going through him were not transmitted to his face, because he made me feel comfortable, because he knew that these were strange conditions under which I was seeing him.
Can you tell us a little bit more then about, the type of relationship that you were able to build with your granddad in his time in prison? Obviously, taking into consideration the constraints that you've said, the physical contact not being allowed, and just the visits are small and they're short. What type of a relationship did you have with him while he was in prison?
It was we became friends. From the time we met in Robben Island, first because I came in, he was sitting, and then I came in and he said, okay, I must stand up first so that he could see how tall I was. And then he started talking about school, and he started to sort of crack the ice and ask me, if I had a boyfriend. I was shy at the time. And remember that, juxtapose that against the background of a very strict grandmother that is a Jehovah's Witness, where you can't have boyfriends until you are in the process of getting married. So I was in between these two worlds of my father, that's a liberal, and my grandmother, that's a very conservative person. So I was a bit shy, and then he then asked me, when last said, "Have I had a pap smear?" Darling, have you had a pap smear? I didn't even know what a pap smear was at the time. And by the time I left on that day, it was a very short visit, 30 minutes. It was over within no time. And we became friends, because at the second day, because I was due to go see him Saturday and Sunday. On the Sunday, I missed my ride. And I was devastated. I was crying at the dogs, and he reapplied for me. Then I had to go see him during the week. At the end of that interview, at the end of that visit, he had presented me with a box of Black Magic chocolates with a message that your visit will always be a bittersweet memory. At that time, I did not know the significance of black chocolate, that it's bitter, but it had that bittersweet, and it had a rose outside, a red rose. And from that time with Granddad, we became friends, really. I could talk to Granddad about anything. And he was really non-judgmental, and yes, very strict as a grandparent, that, if you crossed him or crossed one of his rules, he wouldn't mind not, talking to you, because we butted heads from time to time to a point of not even talking to one another. Because we're very strong-headed, and I suppose on some level I'm more like him. When I'm resolute in doing something, I do it, whatever the consequences. So yeah, we did butt heads at some point, but we remained friends. Although that friendship, when he was released, the illusions that I had that I would now have my grandfather to me were shattered, because suddenly he was everybody's grandfather. I had to vie for his time because he was in between meetings, worse than when he became president, so that we drifted apart during those years. But I'm quite happy that we reconnected after he retired from retirement, and the 3 years prior his death were the times I would always cherish, because I got to spend the time that I had always wanted to spend with him. Although he was no longer in conversational, he was more in reflective mode. He knew he was transitioning to another world, but the moments we spent together are precious. We reconnected. Yeah.
Wow.
Now, Ndileka, when Grandpa was released in 1990, and subsequently after that, some of his comrades in the African National Congress felt that he was a little bit too much of a moderate, and also too quick to reconcile with apartheid supporters. What's your take on that notion?
Well, my take is that every leader leads within a certain context. The context of 1990 is not the context of today. So Granddad cannot be judged according to the context of 2021 or 2020, or he has to be judged by the context of the time. We were on the brink of a civil war, especially after Chris Hani died. We would have gone to a civil war. After Chris Hani, and also after Buipatong, if you remember, CODESA talks broke down completely during in the aftermath of Buipatong. So they took a calculated decision to either go full scale on a civil war, and I suppose that the experience that other African countries that had gone into a civil war, for them, it was a no-go zone. They did not want to see South Africa embroiled in a civil war for years to come, after what they have seen from other states that had gotten their democracy through the point of gun, and that is civil war. So, as Mam Grasa always points out, their mandate as his comrades of that generation, I call them a league of extraordinary gentlemen. That whole caliber of leaders, Walter Sisulu, Andrew Mlangeni, Gavin Mbeki, Oliver Tambo, they were a leadership that were cut from a different cloth. Their mandate was freedom in our time, which was the first building block of our democracy. I liken that to a situation in a home that if you are not at the dinner table, you cannot make decisions. We could not even vote. So our first tier into democracy was one man, one vote, so that we could have a voice. The next rung on that, to me, would be, economical transformation or emancipation, which was upon the shoulders of the people that follow him. The question is, what did the people that follow Granddad's generation do with the freedom that they were given, with the seat at the table that they were given? What did they do with it?
Yeah, and I think that is a very pertinent question in terms of appreciating Nelson Mandela's legacy of passing on the baton, of acquiring freedom that that South Africans have enjoyed over the years. So I'm going to take you a little bit back again, Ndileka, and just to talk about your relationship with your actual father. We know that he also died, and you were fairly young when he passed away. I think it was 4 years old. Can you just talk us about that, the impact of that relationship, and obviously losing the father figures in your life, growing up without them in your life, how that's impacted you?
Well, that I have, two vivid memories of him. One, when he had bought me a cowboy outfit, because perhaps he had hoped that I was a boy. But when I then learned at a later stage that he was called Styles. Styles was a character out of a Western movie. So he loved Western movies, which is why he bought me this Western outfit with a cowboy outfit with the hat, with the gun house and everything. There were all the whistles and bells. And the second one is not a happy one, because it was at his funeral. I remember, going into my grandmother's room, and he was lying in a coffin, and I was asking my mother why he was dark, because my father was light-skinned, just like my sister. So that was a memory of him. And I know that Dad doted on me. But having grown up without a father, I never felt really that I did not have a father. I did not feel that I was missing something. But however, the 56-year-old that's sitting right in front of you today wish I had a father, because I believe that it's an experience that I've seen with my own children, because I'm a single parent. Now, children of single parent, I'm not saying that they're not well balanced. However, they tend to view life in a single focus, the focus in the lens of the parent that brought them up. My view of life is with the lens of Evelyn, because she's the person that brought me up. The sum total of who I am or who I've become is Evelyn, is not even Nelson Mandela. Yes, Granddad certainly influenced, my drive into social justice. But the sum total of my non-conformity stems from Evelyn. Evelyn is a person who, in the 1970s, because when we relocated to the Eastern Cape, she ran a general dealer shop. She was one of the few women in the 70s in a very conservative a village town who owned a business way before women owned businesses. And she was to define that business according to the tenants, to how she felt it had to be run. When the Jehovah's Witness issued an article that smoking harms your lungs, my grandmother stopped selling cigarettes. She even had a sign that there's no smoking in a house, in a thing. Now, you must remember, tobacco and cigarettes were the biggest money spinner. She didn't care. She did it out of principle. We were the butt of jokes and ridicule around my town. She didn't care, because for her, it was built on principle. That was my first lesson into nonconformity, that it doesn't matter what anybody else says. You must be authentic and be real to who you are. Honor your voice, honor your authenticity, honor the essence of who you are. That is the person that taught me the art of that, is Evelyn. So, that I did not have a father, the impact of it, I feel now as an adult, but growing up, I didn't feel it. There are times that I feel that, there are certain things that my father would have given me perspective, a male perspective of things, because I can't claim, because I've got a boy and a girl, I can't claim to be able to direct Tembela, who's my son, in terms of what he needs to hear from a male perspective. I will always have a female perspective of things because I'm a woman. So that's why I say children that are from a single parent household, be it a man or a woman, they view life in a single focus. And I believe that children need a balance in life, to be able to view things from both sides of the spectrum. And that is what I miss about not having a father, because I never had that male perspective of things, because my uncle joined us when I was quite grown. I mean, I was over 21 already. I already had a child. So, and my grandfather was released when I was 25 years old. So he could not influence me as such, because I believe that the time to influence a child is from the time they're born. But if you are to mold a child, for me, it's the teen years, age 14 to 18. That's really the way you can craft character of a person. And if I had to make an analogy about Granddad learned to be the leader that he was through watching tribal counters from the age of 10 from King John Daba in Kregezweni when he was growing up. And he became the leader that he was, which to me points out to the fact that children learn by emulation.
Thank you for joining us on our conversation with Ndileka Mandela, who is the first grandchild of the late great icon, Nelson Mandela, on this special day that we are remembering and commemorating the release of Nelson Mandela on the 11th of February in 1990. So we'll be back with part 2. Please be sure to catch up with that conversation.